Well, Charles, I adore a good story, which is why you're here. I like something that makes me feel, something that's redemptive is what I enjoy the most. It's fine to be entertained, but I realize I often don't remember those as much as the ones that move me. And you are now a top author on my list in that genre. And so I'm first going to take the opportunity to say thank you for inspiring my life.
I'm glad it could happen. I'm thankful that it does happen too.
It's amazing, and now it's going through my whole family at the moment. Is your books? I have Father's Day. I
Listen,
read one and said, "Get me all the books."
nothing sells a book like word of mouth. Actually, I think it's probably the only thing that really sells a book, or at least gets it in people's hands. So thank you.
Well, we're doing that. That's what this is about as well. And the power. Actually, I love the quote that I found on your website by Patty Callahan Henry. Charles Martin understands the power of story, and he uses it to alter the souls and lives of both his characters and his readers. Looking at your trajectory as an author, which I don't know the background. I don't know what got you in this. Did you find that you wanted to write and through that you could have this influence, or did you realize I want to have an influence and this is a vehicle that fits me?
Boy, that's a good one. Let me back up a little, because the thought of me being a writer with influence never, like, that was a long way from my mind. The thing that I was wrestling with was how do I get this stuff that I'm dealing with on the inside? How do I get it out? Like, I started writing, I'm 50 now. I started writing when I was 15. When I was 15, the thing that I was wrestling with is grades. Can I make grades good enough to satisfy my folks? I really wanted to play college football. Could I make grades good enough to go somewhere with, athletics? Could I play college ball? Would anybody have me? And then hormones. And I didn't know what to do with that soup. And I certainly didn't have the verbal skills to be able to say, hey, Kevin, here's what I'm dealing with. And could we have a conversation? And so one night when I was about 15, I sat down and wrote a short story. The short story had nothing to do with what I just told you. It was simply a valve on the pressure cooker. And I learned that I'm hardwired to tell stories kind of out my fingers. Even today, sometimes when I'm speaking, somebody will ask me a question, or I'll just be thinking of kind of what's coming next. And there'll be this pregnant pause. And Christy kind of cringes whenever it happens, because she doesn't know if I'm about to just crumble and flub it and not know what to say, or like, are there actually words coming next? But I think my mind is hardwired to tell stories out my fingers. So even when I'm speaking, my words will leave my mind and travel out to the ends of my fingers. And if they find no keyboard, then they'll come back to my mouth. So it's sort of a little bit of a cyclical process. That's or around your elbow to get to your thumb. But I picked up that writing thing when I was about 15. I did it all through high school. I did it all through college. The first time I ever wrote something that affected anyone outside of my family, because family, while they matter, they don't matter. When it comes to your writing, they're supposed to tell you it's good and they love you. Okay. But the first time I wrote something that really moved someone was my senior year in college. I was at Florida State trying to graduate, trying to figure out how Christy and I could get married. And I had one class left to go, and it was a writing class. And I turned in my assignment. It was a story. The question was, write something that happened in the last week. I wrote something that happened in the last week. One of my relatives that was real close to me had passed away. He was instrumental in my life. I wrote that story, turned it in. When she handed back the papers, mine didn't have a grade on it. Everybody else had a grade, and she was really liberal with the red marker. Mine had no marks, no grade. Only on the back of it, on the back page, it was as if somebody had taken their fingers and dipped them in water and then kind of splattered them on the page. And I thought, I'm not going to graduate. Like, I really flubbed this. So I go see her after class, and I'm like, I'll do anything. I'll write 5 stories. I'll do whatever you need. And she teared up. She said, Charles, you don't put grades on stories like those. It was the first time I'd ever written in something that moved someone emotively like I had been when I wrote it. So that was kind of a marker for me, and I held on to that for a long time. I went through grad school. Christy and I got married. I'm 27 years old at this point. I'm in the business world, which is not where I want to be, but I got to put food on the
I
table.
was going to ask, what were you getting degrees and graduates?
I
What were you
got
pursuing?
a master's in journalism and a PhD in communication. And I thought, maybe if I can't write, maybe I could teach somewhere. And so when I graduated with all of that, I came back to Jacksonville. Nobody would hire me to teach. My brother-in-law had mercy on me and gave me a job in the insurance business. And while I need it, I'm not very good at selling it. But he was kind enough to give me a job. And in the meantime, I find myself writing this manuscript. So at the age of 27, I finished what I would call a book, and I give it to Christy. And she says, honey, it's better than some of the stuff I've read in Barnes and Noble. And so from then, for me, it was kind of the question, because up until then I was afraid. I mean, just brass tacks. I would walk in Barnes and Noble and I'd see all those huge faces on the wall. And I would think, well, those are the kind of people that write books, that, like, whoever they are, that's just, that you got to be them. And then one day it struck me, they weren't always them. They used to be just a nobody like me. And I kind of got over that fear of, what if it doesn't work out or whatever. And so I wrote this manuscript. That manuscript was rejected 86 times from publishers and agents all across the country. I still have all those letters in a folder in a file right over there.
No, did you know agent? You were going straight to the publisher?
I was trying. Well, this is 1999. This is back when, the writer's guide was something you bought in Barnes and Noble. And I was soliciting primarily agents, but also publishers who said they would accept unsolicited manuscripts. So anyway, long story. It was rejected 86 times. And then through some neat things that, like, only the Lord can orchestrate, another writer heard about me, invited me to lunch. He's, sold umpteen million novels. I think he's written 60 or 75 novels at this point. And he really wanted to know, are you a one book wonder or do you have a second book in you? Because a lot of people can write one book. Very few jump past that. And I was already halfway through, 3/4 of the way through number 2. While I'm sitting at lunch, he makes a phone call to some agents on the West Coast and says, hey, I've got somebody you ought to look at. And they both contacted me. And the next day they asked to represent me. So that's 1999. My question was never, how can I wield influence? My question was, I think the best way I can describe it is this. One of the things I picked up on in grad school, we studied John Milton. John Milton wrote an essay called Areopagitica. Our founding fathers used this essay to argue for our First Amendment rights. And in there, I'm going to butcher this, but in there, it says something like, on a field of open encounter, let truth and falsehood grapple. On a field of open encounter, whoever knew truth put to the worse. And it became something for me like, okay, if truth and falsehood battle, maybe, like, can my stories compete with the best of this stuff out there? Like, let's give it a shot. If it doesn't, okay, great. I'll go sell insurance or I'll try and teach or whatever. But I do think I have some stories. I have a hard drive full of them. I think maybe I could do this. So it wasn't so much about influence. It was about, I have this really deep desire, which I think the Lord poured in me, which was just this innate thing to tell stories. And I love the emotive arc, finding a character in a place that's broken and taking him through the course of the story to not broken. That's still what gets me out of bed. And I was hopeful that somebody would let me do that.
From 15, when you started writing, to 27 or so when this starts to come to fruition, did you have testimony during that time to your efficacy at writing? Or did you, as a reader, just feel like, this holds water to some degree? So, and was that paper you turned in to the teacher, or was that the first outside testimony?
Totally. Literally, that's the first time. Throughout all of this period, I'm submitting stories to all of the places that you're supposed to. New Yorker, you name it.
Okay.
Saturday Evening Post, whatever. I would submit stories. None of them were ever accepted. So the only thing I had to hold on to at this point was a teacher who cried over one of my stories, and it was like a authentic thing. It was also my sweet spot because it was a story in a voice that was first person, which I obviously now 15 novels later am pretty comfortable with.
With the rejection, that book, did that book come to fruition?
Yeah, that manuscript, Christy and I sent out to over, we did the whole packet with the cover letter where you're basically begging somebody to give you the time of day. And then I think we put like the first 4 or 6 chapters in there and sent them out. And then we also put a self-addressed stamped envelope in there because you hope to hear back from somebody. Even if it's a rejection, you want to hear something. And we sent out over 100 of those, and I got 86 back of them before I had lunch with Davis, this other writer. And that Chris Farabee, my agent, called me the following day, or the guy that became my agent. And then 3 weeks later, we had a publishing contract with one of the houses that had previously rejected me. And what's been kind of fun over the last now 22 years is to have conversations with folks that I've met, just a few of them, that sent me letters saying thanks, but I don't think this is really going to work for us. And some of them have been kind of funny. So,
Well, and that's what I was. So is that, which book is that?
that's The Dead Don't Dance. That's
Okay,
my
that's what I was wondering, if that was your first book. I told you that it just so happens that yesterday I had Andy Andrews on the show, and his first manuscript, it was 50 sometimes that it was, and that was the Traveler's Gift that has gone on, yeah, and sold so ridiculously. And he said, with all with no spite or anything, but he said it's just amazing that those publishers they weren't just wrong; they were really
Yeah.
wrong.
We think about the publishers now, looking at that book. I don't know how many umpteen million copies it sold, but like that was a really bad miss on their part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's unreal. So full time. When did this? So you're doing insurance, you're doing whatever. When did was that book? I mean, was there a book deal that was enough to get you rolling? When did you finally say, okay, I'm going to go after this authoring thing. I'm going to settle here, or try to.
I had in 1999, I was working with my brother-in-law. His insurance agency had become very successful, not because of me, but because I helped him put legs on his promises, and he was really good at what he did. The company that we represented was bought by Allstate. That Allstate was then trying to merge the American Heritage Life, which is the company we represented, and trying to get all of the agents and everybody on the same language in terms of how they process, how they sell the products, and they needed somebody who could communicate to both sides. I had traveled the country with Tommy. I'd made hundreds of presentations, and I knew the products, and I knew the people in the home office, and probably the letters behind my name helped me. And so they offered me, it was like this, I don't know, you remember the movie, the Tom Cruise movie, The Firm?
Yeah.
Remember the scene where the Memphis firm brings him in and they sit him down and they put the envelope on the table and he sort of has to guess what the offer is, and there's that feeling in the room where
Vaguely, yeah.
they value him and they really want him. And I had an experience similar to that. The folks brought me in, top of the building, the view outside stretched for miles, and they offered me this job, which was an officer's position with a staff and a bonus and a huge salary. And
so even while you say that wasn't your gig, sales isn't your thing, you obviously had some proficiency in it.
Yes. I mean, I could have done it. The problem was that my head would have been detached from the rest of me.
Yeah.
And it would have been soul crushing. And I'm not knocking folks that do that. And I'm thankful but it's just not, it's not my heart's cry to grow that business. Right. And in the meantime, when they're talking to me and they're telling me what the silver platter they're going to lay out in front of me, my mind is literally thinking about the drawer in my desk where that manuscript is sitting. And I'm thinking to myself, if I take this job, I don't know that I'll ever write another word, because this is all consuming. This will own me for the next 30 years. I knew the culture. And so that was sort of a long weekend for Christy and I, where we really wrestled with, who do you want to be when you grow up? And in a really cool way, what happened on Sunday afternoon was Christy essentially gave me permission to chase this writer thing. I mean, it's a priceless gift. I went back in Monday morning and I said, no, thank you. I resigned from Tommy's office, my brother-in-law's office. I hugged him. I love you, but I got to go figure out, I got to go see if I can do this writer thing. That started about 18 months of some really like hard, like we didn't have two nickels to rub together. And I looked like a total fool until I had lunch with Davis, got a publishing contract. The book came out May 5th, 2003, and 7 days later, Hallmark Hall of Fame Productions called us to make it a made-for-TV movie. They optioned it. They never made it, but it gave me credibility with my publisher. It got me another contract, and more importantly, it gave me credibility with my father-in-law, and I really needed that.
Wow.
So that was sort of the launch that allowed me. That wasn't like all of a sudden the world is great. My first advance on that book was $10,000. So it's, you know, I mean, we got kids. I mean, it's not, you know, we ain't hit easy street. So I built decks, I built docks, I built cabinets. I had a pressure washer and a trailer that I pulled out. And I just would do whatever people would pay me to do.
How much that's a great lead into my, I have not, I've had untold, well, you can see the bookshelf behind me of people I've had on the show, never a pure fiction. Andy Andrews yesterday is probably the closest, you know, to that. I mean, he is an author and writes fiction in a sense, but you as a true-blooded fiction writer, and it's a curiosity to me. I am such a fan of fiction, just as I am of music. I am a huge connoisseur of music. Don't play it, don't do anything. I just adore it. I've got friends in the music industry that write songs. I cannot fathom doing that. It's not my skills. I have other skills. So to what you do though, to put a story together, you just mentioning that you built docs, whatever. I'm reading When Crickets Cry right now. And that was part of my question. So not because you have the storytelling, but the thing that's always been of interest to me, that along with the story, the scope of the story, the journey that this is going to take, that's in your mind, that's, you know, that it's going through as you're at all times of day and night, I'm sure. You also have research to do to figure out how to fill in the qualities, roles of these characters. And I wondered how many. Actually, before that question, how much of yourself is in each book, is in the characters? How much of yourself / and your personal experience?
Well, that's changed. I'm now 22 years in, 20 years published.
Yeah.
And 15 novels. So if you look at The Dead Don't Dance, Wrapped in Rain, maybe a little bit When Crickets Cry, those are my first 3 books. You'll see a character, especially in The Dead Don't Dance and in Maggie, which is my 4th, because the Maggie is sort of a sequel to The Dead Don't Dance. They have the same characters. My protagonist in that book is Dylan Stiles, and Dylan and I are real similar. I mean, I didn't know what else to write. I didn't know how to create somebody else. I had a hard enough time figuring out me. So, and also everybody, you know, a lot of the rejections I got rejected the fact that I wrote in first person. Well, I didn't really know how to write in third person. I mean, I can, but it emotively doesn't accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish, because in order for me to do what I'm hoping to do, you have to know what I'm thinking, not just what I'm saying. And you got to know how I respond to stuff. So first person was the only way I could do that. Probably there's much more, you know, you can mirror, or you can look at my characters and say, you know, especially the people that know me, yeah, I see a whole lot of Charles in these first 3 or 4 books. As we get further from books 4 or 5, whatever, my rabbits, you know, my hat is out of tricks, and I've kind of written me. So then I've got to just sort of start making stuff up, which was also freeing because it opened the doors of a lot of stuff that I got to go do that maybe I hadn't done before. And let's just take The Mountain Between Us as an example. I'm from the Southeast. I've spent a whole lot of time on the water, both river or ocean. I know how to fish. I've hunted a lot. I've done a lot of backpacking east of the Mississippi, but I'd never spent any time in the high Uintas or the Rockies. So after the success of Where the River Ends, which was my first book to hit the Times list, I just had this idea for a story, and it took place in those mountains. And so I called my agent and a buddy, and I said, let's go rent snowmobiles and get lost for a week. And that's what we did. And that led to me spending time with an orthopedic surgeon trying to figure out. My big question for that book was, if there's a plane crash in the middle of nowhere and this lady breaks her femur, and how long does she have before she's done? And I called one of my buddies and I just said that exact thing to him. And he, without blinking, he said, well, did the bone break the skin? I said, dude, I don't know. You're the doctor. You help me figure it out. And he said, well, if it doesn't break the skin, you have a sealed wound, you have more time. I said, okay, then it did not break the skin. So the research has then kind of become part of, it's been mandated by the story to some extent. That's been true with, Unwritten, part of which takes place in France. Where the River Ends takes place on a river here from Georgia to Florida, 130 miles long. I kayak the whole thing. So that opened up the door of sort of, hey, let's go do this.
Yeah, because I'm reading When Crickets Cried. It sounds like there's a lot in that book that you knew some of that. You knew some of the construction, the water, you knew some of those things already. So
I knew a lot of the carpentry aspects of that.
Yeah.
And fun, especially kind of decking out his garage and getting to talk about all the things that are in there. But I did not know the heart piece. And through just some neat relationships, I was introduced to some of the finest either transplant or heart surgeons in the country and got to spend time with them and stand in the OR, scrub the whole thing behind the sheet and kind of stick my nose over and when they crack somebody open. And I mean, I had some phenomenal experiences watching these people do what they do. So some of it I knew, a lot of it I had to learn. Interestingly, though, with that book, I've had people email me, a lot of them, and say, where did you get your medical degree?
Huh. Okay.
I'm a doctor, but I'm not that kind of doctor.
Yeah. Just to come back to your story, we talked about the story writing. Where was your faith along that way? Was that always a solid component that you knew you wanted to be investing in, or was there a journey there? Of course there was a journey, but was that a solid rudder throughout the journey?
I've known Jesus. I tell folks this. It may not be a testimony, but I grew up in a home where Jesus was and still is Lord of all. And he still is to this day in my house and in my heart. And so as I'm walking through this experience, I'm on my face and my prayers are like, Lord, this thing makes me come alive. I love doing this. I feel like if I have a gift at anything, I do feel like you've put something in here. I'm not trying to make more of me or make it about me, but I do feel like there's something you've put here that communicates in a way that I don't see other people doing. And so here's my request. And it really did come down to this. I said, Lord, I would really love to be able to do this. If you could somehow make this happen, that is my heart's desire. But if it is not your desire for me, then will you please take this desire out of my chest? Because it's going to hurt. If I have to live in this world where I'm doing something else and wanting to be this. So I'm giving it Christy and I did. We really laid it down and laid it at the Lord's feet. That was probably the first time I had to lay down my Isaac, where I gave him I gave the giving and the taking up to him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just said, this is my heart's desire, but if it's not yours for me, then lead me where you want me. But if you don't lead me here, then please take this desire out of me, because it's going to be brutal being somebody else with this dream.
So talk to me about that. I had a friend many years ago who gave me a little cassette tape with 3 songs he had on it. And I played it and was just blown away. And with the expectation of, oh my gosh, this is your destiny. And at the time though, he said, I want it too much. The Christian guy, he says, I want it too much. I love the applause. I know I do. And so I'm not going to pursue it. And we had a journey from that point. He went on to become very successful in the music business. But to that, I mean, you know how many, there's people listening, there's thousands listening that'll listen to this show and hear that, and they have that desire, but they're questioning it because of self-interest, because of, well, just there, I'll just put that there, that you know, especially from maybe the faith-based brethren are even more troubled by this sometimes, the self-interest in something that their heart wants to do, but they think, no, I need to be responsible. That's something that I just want for me. How do I trust? So I'll put the question that out there, to trust the desires of your heart.
We may need another podcast for that one, but let me try to give you the answer as succinctly as I can. We as people tend toward idolatry very quickly. This is true in my experience. This is true biblically. This is true historically. What was not important then and what is not important now is that you see my name on the New York Times list. I am grateful for when that happens. Please don't hear me the wrong way. But the thing that was important then, and the thing that is important now, and the thing that I'm praying will be important tomorrow, is that my relationship with him is unfettered, because that's more important than you having my book on that shelf behind your shoulder. I'm grateful that y'all read my stories, and I mean that, I really do. It blesses me deeply. I love seeing the expression of my gifting affirmed and valued. And I love the fact that you would have me and we would talk about that and all of that. So I'm not downplaying any of that. But the thing that, if I have to choose between him or this writing thing, I'm choosing him every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I'll just let him figure out the writing thing somewhere down the road. And I think as long as I stay in that place, I stay in a healthy place, both with him and with my craft. If that gets twisted, first, I have a wife who is really good at popping my bubble. So I have that boundary in line, but it's not a good thing when I increase and he decreases. It's much better if I decrease and he increases.
In that same vein, with the characters in your book, and I'm only on the third nonfiction. I'm working my way through Crickets right now. So I started off on what was the
Long Way Gone?
Long Way Gone. Yeah, which my dear friend, my host in my other podcast, the True Life podcast, he's a doctor, he's an MD, Randy James, he got me reading fiction again. I just didn't for so long. He kept talking about it at night. And so I started doing that. I started looking forward to going to bed, getting me to go to bed earlier, but I wanted something good. So he gave me that book. He got it. I think his wife gave it to him. I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know anything about you, just nothing. Read the thing. And you start off in Leadville.
Yep.
Which we ski there a lot. My daughter is there. She wears a Melly. So you got me right off the bat there. And then you go to Nashville. That's where we spent a decade before coming out here in the music industry and all that. And you're, enmeshed in that. And then you come back out to Buena Vista, which we're at constantly. And I love, you got me there. And the other books I'm going to work through all of them. I'm going to enjoy myself through all of them. And there's none of them on my bookshelf because they're all at my house being read by my family. But in those you have, or the three I'm in now, we have strong characters, male and female, for the most part. But the male ones, of course, that's what I tune into more as a guy. With the characters in there, do you find yourself, or maybe to what degrees, with the values that they showcase, that these are values that you have to some degree and you want to impart, like to your sons, to the audience? And also, are there some in there that you are striving to emulate and aspire to? If I look at those characters, where would you say you fall generally?
I'm striving to emulate a lot of them because a lot of them are a lot better than me in a lot of ways. If you look at the spectrum of my characters, though, I don't necessarily sit down with a values agenda. I know you didn't, but just let me finish this.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily sit down with a values agenda and say, hey, here's what I want my reader to come away with, or here's what they need to know, or here's what they need to believe, or whatever. That thought has never crossed my mind. I've published over 2 million words now, and that one doesn't enter the equation. I go back to what I said a little bit ago. The thing that gets me up out of bed in the morning is this idea that I have a character who's broken. I believe that that process or that arc or that story from broken to not is really worth writing about. And the reason it's worth writing about is because hope wins. And we live in a hopeless culture, which wakes up every day and says, hey, here's your dish of hopelessness, eat it. Sorry if you're not satisfied, see you later. That I react very strongly negatively to that. So if I can somehow craft or write characters that, while they are very much broken and fallen and do walk with a limp, and the thing is not wrapped up in some neat little bow at every turn, but that where the reader is left with something hopeful, then I feel like I've communicated at least what is on my heart to try and communicate. I mean, I've had a lot of folks ask me, summarize your books in one sentence. Hope wins. Period. End of story. Does that mean everything is always fixed? Nice little neat bow? No. I have some broken characters. Unwritten is about Water from My Heart is about a guy that is really good at dealing drugs. I've never dealt drugs my entire life, but I've got to know some people who did and talked to them and figured out what their life was like. And I don't know, I just think that process, if let me parallel that with my prayer. Okay. Because maybe my prayer answers your question, maybe better. When I was in grad school, one of the things I tapped into was C.S. Lewis and Walker Percy, those two folks. And Percy said something that I latched a hold of. He said that stories are like road signs and they point somewhere. He hoped his would point to Jerusalem, to the king that is king of all kings, somehow, without being blatantly Christian. Lewis said the same thing. He said, what we don't need is more Christian writers. What we need are writers with their Christianity latent who write great fiction. So I latched a hold of those two guys and I just started praying, Lord, will you let my stories be road signs to Jerusalem? Will you allow my words to in some way reach people in hearts that are either hard or calloused or dinged, or, they've been hurt or wounded, and let my words somehow circumnavigate the wounded places and let them touch them where they're still tender and they still laugh and still love and still want to forgive. And can you let my stories do that, please? That's been my prayer.
Well, I can testify to that in my own experience so far, reading what I have of yours. When you look at the books, so I've been on your website looking at the list of books. Do you see books that contain, I'm going to use the word values, but those signposts that matter to you? And they all do, to a degree, have similar signposts, let's say. Or do you look at them and say, in that one, that had a particular signpost that you hope came through. That was your intent, was for that book to have that signpost, and that book has a different signpost.
It's interesting when you ask. I don't, when I'm in the mode of creating the story, I don't necessarily look at it and go, oh, gee, that's a signpost. I'm looking at the character and I'm trying to figure out, how do I show that this guy loves that woman with all that he is? How do I take this guy and put him in an impossible situation with a woman that's not his wife? And they're in this plane crash in the middle of nowhere and nobody knows they're there. And how does he stay faithful to his wife? Can he? Is it even possible? What's that look like? And if I could write it well enough, at the end of that book, he would still be faithful, and yet the reader would be pulling for him to fall, to stay in love with one woman and fall in love with another. So how do I write that story? For me, that's the process I'm in. It's not so, I'm stepping back, looking at it here with you, and I'm telling you what my prayers are. But when I'm in it, I'm trying to tell a love story. I'm just trying to show how, like Long Way Gone. To some extent, Long Way Gone is my take on the prodigal.
Mm-hmm.
How do I write this love story about this crazy gifted musician who betrays his father severely, takes everything he has, loses everything. And when he loses everything, he can't come home and he can't face his dad. And what you discover is that before he ever betrayed his dad, his father made a way home for him. How can I tell that story? That was Long Way Gone.
That brings up, are your books, I don't know how to ask this, do you conceive, or is your catalyst, is your inspiration initially a story, or in that, a concept where you looked at the prodigal son and said, how can I weave that into a story in the way that
it's usually a moment. I usually have a daydream or a flash or something that kind of happens back here, kind of outside of my peripheral vision. And it's usually just a picture. With Long Way Gone, it wasn't so much, hey, here's the story of the prodigal in Luke 15. It was the picture of the prodigal feeding the pigs. I mean, he's a Jewish boy working for a pig farmer. That's total apostasy. He could not be any more unclean. And he's feeding them slop, and he's looking at it with an eye towards eating it. For some reason, I just had a picture of that one day going, that's a little bit of a dilemma. With Send Down the Rain, maybe you'll get to that one later. It involved a Vietnam veteran. For me, the question became, once I got to know this character, how does he lay down his life for somebody that hates him? Or how did he lay down his life for somebody that hates him? And why hasn't he ever told anyone? Even after they sent him to prison.
Yeah.
So it's really, it goes back to this character. And I see him in this place of broken. I mean, you're reading When Crickets Cry. It starts off on the street corner in Clayton, Georgia. Little girl selling lemonade. There's a guy looking at her who knows she needs a heart transplant. I want to know his story. He can help her, and I know he can help her.
Don't tell me too much yet.
He's broken. Something's happened to him. What is that something?
Yeah, I'm dying to find out. When you talk about
one thing, there's going to come a point in this book that you're reading right now when you hate me and you're going to want to throw the book in the trash. Okay. My encouragement is just keep reading. I cannot tell you the number of people that I have had email me and a slew of 4-letter words and threw that book in the trash can. And I would ask them, sir, ma'am, you're welcome, to react. But did you finish the book? And then they would give me some more 4-letter words and tell me no. And I would just encourage them. It might be worth your time to, and it's been really interesting to read the emails that follow that.
I can't imagine. Well, I'll get there. Well, speaking of that then, and I don't really care to focus on it a ton, but, I know that I read somewhere that you had a desire early on or for a book to be made into a movie. You talk about that very first one option for Hallmark. And then obviously with the Mountain Between Us, I had seen the cover of the film plenty of times and just never had seen it, had no idea the connection. And of course, get a hold of the book, read the book. I can't say enough good about it. I appreciated it so much, and then read some of the reviews about the movie from a lot of your readers who were upset with how it panned out. And folks, listen, and I want everybody to hear, if you're going to read the book, watch the movie, you sent me the link, and it was on your blog, and it was, I think, just titled "What I Thought About the Movie." Is that right?
Yeah, what I think about the movie. Yeah,
which was great. I go do that, and it helped me because I read that. Then we did watch the movie, and I was able to do what you kind of attested to. Hey, the book is awesome. The movie, just let it stand alone as a neat movie.
Right.
Like we were able to do that. And my wife was she was a little irked. Um, it was interesting though, because I thought, not that we have Hollywood that doesn't, they plenty of times have movies well, I was gonna say that bombed. The movie did fine. But man, I just was perplexed of why they took the meat, take some of the biggest points out of it. And I was just wondering why. Where did they? Because I've read a lot of books that have been made into movies, and every once in a while, I've always wondered about asking an author, "Hey, did you ever see the movie and think, oh man, that was a better idea than I had?" It got to happen. But on this one, I thought, I don't understand why they would have done that. I'm sure you had to have found yourself, and I know you were disappointed about some of the things that they portrayed in that, but on some of them, did you wonder why did they really flip-flop that whole point that was so weighty? It had a lot of gravity in it, and why on earth would they flip that around?
One of the things Christy and I and the boys have prayed about a bunch, and I mean that. I've prayed it 1,000 times. Lord, would you please take my stories and put them on the big screen? I would love to sit in a theater with a bucket of popcorn and my family and watch all of the people in the theater watch the movie based on my book. For some reason, I just think that's kind of a cool translation from one medium to the next. And I'm a big movie goer. And so that's been something we've prayed a long time. In 2008-ish, 20th Century Fox called us and optioned the rights to The Mountain Between Us. We could not have been more excited. Peter Chernin, David Reddy, Beth Gabler, these are some of the most accomplished people in Hollywood, and they've done a lot of really great movies. We've seen most all of them. They're phenomenal professionals. This began a 9-year process of screenplays, and it would kind of die and get quiet, and then we'd hear a little bit. And then in about the end of 15 or the first part of 16, they had landed on a screenplay that they liked, and they had attached Kate Winslet and Idris Elba and Hani Abu Assad to direct. And with that trio, the movie kind of took off, and they began, sending us details and telling us kind of we're going to film it in Vancouver or north of Vancouver. And so we got pretty excited, and they invited us up for a day of filming up in Vancouver, got to meet everybody. Phenomenal experience. I wouldn't change any of that. It was awesome. We got to go to the red carpet premiere at the Toronto Film Festival. I mean, I'm a guy from Northeast Florida. What am I doing in this theater with 3,000 people? I mean, it was just this surreal thing. Loved all of that. The movie is cinematically, to this day, it's still stunning. I think it's one of the most cinematically beautiful movies I've ever seen. They just didn't stick with my story. And I get that. Hollywood and folks that make movies are dealing with a different medium. They're trying to take 12 or so hours of reading and put it in 120 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever it is. So I get there's a translation thing that occurs, and we're going through that now. The Long Way Gone has been optioned, and so we're going through that screenwriting process now. So I understand more of it, but they almost kind of didn't need my book to tell the story that they told in the movie. And there were one or two, three key things in my story that they pulled out that it was kind of like the reason I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was hard. Now, that's their, I wish it had not happened that way. I would love it had they told my story, but that wasn't what they chose to do. Does that make them evil? No, it just makes them people making movies.
Well, and I told my family, as my wife was a little upset with it. And I said, what a really cool fruition that you wrote about in the blog was that when the movie came out, the book sold like fire. That was really cool.
Yeah, the book it was on the Times list for a couple of weeks. It did sell better. Today, when I send a newsletter, it'll be opened in 50 to 60 countries around the world, including a lot of Russia, China, North, South Korea, all over Africa. And that's because they had those two actors with an international presence in that movie. And I think the movie did far better internationally than it did here in the States, which is a testimony to the faces they had in the movie. It just wasn't my story.
Right.
That's a lesson a lot of writers have learned. That was just my time to learn it. Will I do it differently in the future? Sure.
That was my next question. So you just said Long Way Home was optioned. And just for people who don't understand what that even means, I know I think it was in your blog, you said it's like selling your house.
Well, all right. Optioning it is like renting it with an option to buy. Okay. So when you option it, you give the rights to someone and they're basically leasing them for an 18 to 36 months or something like that. When the train gets in motion to film the movie, they have script, director, actors, and they're set towards photography. That triggers the option, and the option is selling your house. Okay. And at that point, the new owner can move in just the way you left it with your furniture and soap in the shower and just be just how you live there. Or they can bring in a bulldozer and they can bulldoze your 200-year-old family estate to the ground, remove the foundation, and you have no say because you've sold it.
So are you doing it differently with Long Way Home?
Yes. And it's been cool the way that's panned out. Reserve Entertainment is run by a guy named Darren Mormon. Darren lives in and around Hollywood. He's been in this game about 20 something years. He's made some great movies. He came to me after he had read Long Way Gone and said, I'd love to put your story on the screen. And I said, well, could we kind of talk about that and maybe define how you see my story? And we had a fantastic afternoon. And Darren is just a neat guy and kind of has become like a brother from the other side of the continent. And what I was left with and what I'm still left with today is his desire to sort of guard the story. And he feels like the story is good enough and the story will translate to the screen. So how do we guard that? The tension is, how do you write a screenplay that accomplishes what the book did, or can you? And I think there's some ways that you can, but look, it is difficult to take 10 plus hours and put it in 2. Plus it's a visual experience primarily, not it's visual and auditory, not just simply something that you read. So yes, we've gone about it differently. Darren and I have had some really frank conversations. I feel like his heart is to guard the story. We're in the middle, or they are in the middle of writing the screenplay. I have a really great screenwriter who's working on it as we speak. I've actually talked with him and he asked me questions about what I was thinking when I did this, or what was I hoping to accomplish. And so it's just a very different process. It's 180 degrees different than the first time we went around this.
Do you have it in mind now when you're writing a book, that with the desire to have this as a movie, does it alter any of your storytelling to maybe make it a little more palatable for the screen?
That's a great question. I don't know that I would know how to do that because I've not written a screenplay. I've not produced a movie. I've not painted that canvas. I don't know how to do that. So if it's altered the way I do story, I'm not cognizant of it.
Your latest book, which I wasn't even aware of till recently, came out in May 2020, The Waterkeeper. And I saw that on your website, and I'm blessed. I've got a bunch of kids, got some older ones now, and I have had them testify, write things that a couple of times I've said, guys, I just, if tomorrow's my last day, just thank you. What your son Charlie wrote,
yeah,
and I'll direct everybody to go to your website. I'll put that in the intro and whatnot. But what he wrote as a review to your book, but a testimony to you as a father and a man, you got to have felt like that. That was powerful. That was a gift.
Yes, I'm not a big consumer of social media, and it's primarily a time thing. And I've got all I can handle in this keyboard, and so for me to take this thing and start adding. I just don't have the time for it, and I don't make time for it. And so I woke up the morning that came out, and all my friends are emailing me, "Hey, did you see Charlie's review?" And I have no idea what they're talking about.
Where did he put it? Where was the review?
I think he put it on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
And or I think so. I honestly I don't remember. But what happened was my publisher liked it so much they picked it up and they went into the description in Amazon. And ordinarily, where you tell about the story, you know, and you write something, you know, whatever, they just deleted all that and they put Charlie's review in there. And
That's amazing.
and I read it and I was just, number one, Charlie's a really good writer. He's not probably, he is a better writer at his age now than I was at his age. And so for him to be able to put all that together and to say all those things, and I just loved it. I mean, I did. Like you said just a minute ago, you know, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow and that was today, I'm good. Lord, I'm good.
Yeah. That's, I was just looking it up on Amazon. I read What If It's True. I actually didn't know that it was not fiction. I just told my family, give me a bunch of the books I read this one book. I like them. Give me a bunch of books for fathers. I think they got 3 or 4 or 5. I don't know. And didn't realize that it was nonfiction. And I think that I read that you have another nonfiction book as well.
Well, I have the sequel to that one coming out.
Okay.
I've written the follow-up to What If It's True.
Okay. Is that, where are you going? How much of a focus is that now? Is nonfiction? Is that something again, we're talking about influence, and I'd say now you've got some. Is that now you have the ability to?
Here's where that came from.
Okay.
I'm 50. When I was I've taught even through college, and I taught Bible studies, or I would bring guys together and we would pray and we'd go through books, be it Wild at Heart or whatever. But about 15 years ago, I started this Bible study, and like it became like the second half of my life, like teaching the word or spending time with it or in ministry. Like it just became my life. So I have like these two parts of me. I have this part that, you know, public Charles that writes books and you see him on the shelf. And then this ministry side where I love showing people Jesus through scriptures. I mean, I just walking them up there. And so I sort of have these two parts, and they didn't seem all that well connected. I mean, if you read my fiction, I think there's a pretty good chance that you'll get the sense that, gee, I think this guy's a believer. At least I hope that's the case, but it's never like been this, you know, let me smack you over the head with it. I was working on Long Way Gone. I was working on the manuscript for Long Way Gone. So that's been 3 books ago now. I'm sitting in this very chair. And I just had this thought while I was typing. I mean, and it became this conversation with the Lord. I'm like, Lord, I have a hard drive full of teachings, but they're not necessarily like teachings like I hear at church. And I'm not knocking church. A lot of them are story driven. And they're just different. And I feel like they communicate you in a way that like is palatable. I've seen this stuff work. I've seen you work through these things in people's lives. Could I push pause on my fiction? Would you orchestrate it so I could push pause on my fiction? And would you let me write the story of you and me? And let me try and tell these stories. And I don't know what that'll look like, but would you do that? And so Christy and I were then a couple of weeks later driving through Nashville on the way to Colorado. And I had lunch with my publisher, and I said to Daisy, I just told her exactly what I just told you. And I began telling her about the stories. And in 5 minutes, she was hooked. It was the easiest publishing contract I've ever gotten. She said, yes, let's do it. So she gave me permission at the time. She was publishing she was publishing my fiction, and then she would help me publish my nonfiction. So I pushed pause. I wrote that book, and it's not an also played. It's not a also ran. It's somehow my brain thinks equally in these two directions. And I very much think story and novels, and I have no intention of quitting. But, you know, after What If It's True came out, Daisy said, do you have any more nonfiction? I said, well, I've already kind of outlined the sequel, because after Jesus ascends off the Mount of Olives, about 120 people walk down that hill with one question on their minds, which is, what on earth do we do now? And then they spend their lives answering that question. And I would like to show the story from that moment on through about Acts 17, where Paul and Silas walk into Thessalonica, and they are described as they who have turned the world upside down. And these are people that are describing these two little guys as having upended the power of Rome. So, Daisy, will you let me do that? And she said, yeah. So the nonfiction is not like I don't know what'll come up next. I've literally just finished final edits this week on They Turn the World Upside Down. So do I have any nonfiction in my brain right this minute? No, I'm pretty well spent. But what will the Lord do come January? I have no idea, but I don't have any intention of not writing anymore. I'd love to. I've always said I want to write 50 books. I have no desire of stopping short of 50. What those look like, I don't know.
Who you mentioned C.S. Lewis and Walker Percy. Any specific, obviously the Bible sounds like it's top of the list, but from other authors, even filmmakers that have been consistent sources of inspiration for you?
Honestly, since I started publishing, I'm not a huge reader. I mean, I read scripture a lot. Okay. But outside of that, I have to be pretty intentional. My reason is this: I spend 8+ hours a day here, looking at this thing. And by the time I get to where I might want to read something, I look at it and I go, well, I can either read scripture, which kind of, is Jeremiah said, your words were found by me and I ate them and they became the joy of my delight and my dancing. I mean, I really do love his words. So I have that, or I can go read something else. And something else is like, I have to really want to read it. So I'm not a big, huge reader, but over the course of my life, like I loved Tolkien before Jackson made him otherworldly popular. I read the Narnia stuff. I loved Tolkien more than the Narnia stuff. I love Lewis's nonfiction probably more than his fiction. Till We Have Faces is one of my favorite books. Percy was instrumental to me. When I was growing up, Louis L'Amour, I still, like right here to my right are about 50 of Louis L'Amour's books. And granted, they were just dime store, Western novels. But the thing that he did was the same thing Hemingway did and Steinbeck, which was their economy of words was so great. And what I mean by that is this: they could say in 6 words what it would take most of us about 15 or 18 to say. And they figured out, like Cormac McCarthy is to this day, he's the man when it comes to the least amount of words and the most amount of like impact. And so I gravitated toward people who didn't put in a whole lot of filler and fluff. And Stephen King, he and I are very different writers, but he's one of our finest living writers. And if you read his stuff, there's not a whole lot you can cut. I mean, it means what it means. So I don't know, those folks became significant to me. Just how do I say the most without running you around sort of like this long through this maze of words in order to tell you, kind of show you what it means.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm sure it's a primary reason I like your books. I'm not very patient with the details, and I'll skim to get to the next dialogue, the next point, and I don't skim your books. So you're literally writing every day. You always have something. This isn't a lull that happens. I mean, you're always, so you just had one come out. Well, I say that Waterkeeper just came out. Of course, you probably finished it a year, 2 years ago.
I finish a book a year before y'all see it on the shelf.
Okay.
I've just finished the Waterkeeper is the first installment in a trilogy.
Oh,
so that I've just finished the sequel to that. So it's now, what was that, August? That book will come out next May. So that's, 10 months, something like that, 9 months. But that engine is kind of already in motion and they knew what was coming. So they were working on that prior to me finishing. But it's usually about a year between clicking send to my publisher and when y'all see it on the shelf.
I mean, you're an author, but I mean, you are not, but you are flat out an entrepreneur. You own your own business. You get up in the morning, you decide what needs to be done. So whether you're an entrepreneur or a plumber that owns your own thing, I mean, it's just a machine that you've got to get up and run every morning. Yes.
If Christy were sitting here, one of the things she would tell me that I'm good at is I've always been really self-driven. That's never been a problem for me. I love the challenge of that. So being a writer who works for himself, and I mean, books don't write themselves. I show up every day to a white page. Every writer does. Somehow or another, they have to get done, and we have deadlines. And some people have, like, they see a deadline as a negative thing. I think it's one of the greatest things in the world because it means somebody wants your book. It just means you got to get it finished by then. So I've never really looked at myself as an entrepreneur. I guess definitionally, maybe I am. I know entrepreneurs that are far better at entrepreneuring than me, but I also know that I'm really good at taking one task to completion. And that's kind of what you have to do if you're going to write books. You have to figure out how to begin it and end it. There are a lot of folks who begin and then they never get to the end. Somehow or another, I've found a way to get to the end. I've said this a lot. I'm a much better rewriter than I am writer. And I sweat my books far more than I write them, meaning I'm just good at showing up. I mean, I'm good at just getting in this chair. And if I have to gut it out, I just gut it out. Writer's block is a real thing. I didn't used to think that. And then came Long Way Gone, and then came Send Down the Rain, and then came the sequel to The Waterkeeper. And all I know how to do is gut and pray my way through writer's block.
I have a question right on right on that, but it's so good for the Habit Show. I'm going to save it. So I'm going to jump there. So everybody listening to this show, you're going to have to wait 2 more shows, just like you wait for sequels to Charles' books to hear, because I want to ask about that, but I want to get into your routines and your habits. Man, it is. I could ask so many questions, but that is intriguing. It is intriguing. Again, just like music writing, my friends that do that, and we all got our skills and abilities, but what you do is it's intriguing to me. I'm enamored by it, and ultimately, I'm just grateful. Thank you for doing what you do, for grinding it out when you have to, following the Lord for inspiration, so that we get that inspiration. I've been inspired. My family has. It's sparked conversations, and it will more as we go through and read them. So again, as I started off with, thank you.
Look, I'm grateful. I love it. I love it when people read my stories, and I'm thankful that they do. I've had some people say some phenomenal things that I never had. A girl walk up to me in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and lay my book down and say, "Your book walked me out of suicide."
Wow.
So and that's not the only time it's ever been. And I'm not telling you that to like pump me up. I'm just telling you with gratitude that I'm thankful the Lord has allowed me to do this, and that somehow or another these words are doing kind of what I pray they do.
Well, as one of my best friends says, thank you for the Jesus in you that does what you do. So I'll give you that. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thanks.